Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. I was a little surprised, I must say, to read on one of the most prominent New Zealand websites, news websites that is, claims that there's, quote, a whiff of panic in Anthony Joshua's training camp. In a rather unflattering opinion piece which makes a number of highly debatable assertions, it states that some last-minute shopping for sparring partners suggests all is not going to plan, that Parker is in Joshua's head, and that there was confusion in Joshua in the gloves are off segment that was broadcast in the last few days. So what I want to do is get to some of the statements and then my thoughts on what I see as a bit of an unnecessary parochial shroud-waving exercise that actually has great potential to misinform a great many fans. More on that soon. So the piece by stuff.co.nz, and the link is in the description. It reads that some last-minute shopping for sparring partners suggest all is not going to plan as heavyweight boxing's main man sharpens his tactics for his clash with Joseph Parker in Cardiff in just over 2 weeks. A couple of weeks ago, there was the surprise move to try get his last opponent, Carlos Takam, into the training ring, and it's understood there have been late calls made to Americans Malik Scott, who has previously been used by Parker, and Eric Molina, another of Joshua's recent victims, to get them to the Sheffield training camp. Then there was the strange circumstances of Joshua having Kiwi amateur Patrick Mailata in the ring with him briefly. With all due respect to young Patrick, who soon heads away to the Commonwealth Games full of ambition, he's a long way off the experience demanded at this level of professional game. Later in the opinion piece, it says that there have been doubts in Joshua's mind for some time when it comes to Parker. He admitted in the controversial build-up to get this fight, where the Kiwis were calling out the Big Brit's suspect chin, so that one's in inverted commas, that he was confused by Parker's approach. Anyone who has watched Joshua and Parker confront each other at close quarters in the subsequent The Gloves Are Off interview in the UK will see some confusion in Joshua. And just for good measure, the piece, it also adds, it seems Team Parker have got into his head just as they intended. As I mentioned already, there is a link in the description box to take you to the piece in its entirety. So you probably already guessed, there's a few things that I do take issue with. So I'll start by saying, imagine if it were a general news opinion piece on a major topic of the day. We'd actually be demanding a semblance of balance to even out the opposing views, or to simply provide fuller context. And this is where there's a bit of a departure in sports journalism, where there is a more relaxed attitude to this sort of thing, and you can end up with lopsided pieces that effectively tear strips off someone, and in this case Anthony Joshua's preparations. And having worked in the media previously, I feel strongly about this sort of thing because Stuff is one of the two dominant mainstream media websites in New Zealand. Surely there's an obligation to properly inform readers, and mostly in an impartial way. Remember, many people reading the material will take these things on face value and think it's fact. So let's start with the sparring. The key spoke there was a whiff of panic in Joshua's training camp. So that relies on calls that have possibly been made to Malik Scott and Eric Molina. I can almost guarantee you if the website could have verified this, it would have run the piece as a story and not an opinion piece. But it had to settle with using "it's understood," which means that they couldn't confirm anything with certainty, but they wanted to run something regardless, and using "it's understood," it gives it a thin veil of credibility. But okay, say if the sparring rumour is true. We don't know, but say it's true, call's gone out, it doesn't really matter to who, but a call's gone out. Why is this automatically just a bad thing, as it's been framed in the Stuff opinion piece? I actually think it's a little bit of a stretch just to automatically take it to the bad end of town and claim there's a whiff of panic. I mean, you could actually certainly argue that bringing in top-level sparring partners is actually a good move, and it could represent that Joshua and his trainer Rob McCracken are not wanting to leave any stone unturned because of the magnitude of the event. They are taking Joseph Parker seriously. I actually thought the addition of Carlos Takam a couple of weeks back, a common opponent of both Joshua and Parker, it was a very smart move when it came to light. I actually took from that Joshua, he wanted to ensure he was prepping for all eventualities. And did that mean that sparring wasn't going well until then? Well, possibly, but not necessarily. Even if it were, isn't bringing in Takam the sort of adjustment you'd be making? Isn't that more of a positive move? And just because Eddie Hearn says Joshua needed some elite level sparring, it doesn't necessarily mean he'd been having an easy time of it or not getting good sparring prior to the arrival of Takam. So I do think it's actually a little unfair just to drop the whiff of panic claim based on no real evidence, a potential call out to other sparring partners. But even if the call was made, well, so what? You could actually argue it's a good thing. And I really do feel here, and so I'm going to get into it a bit more, get into them, because I feel sorry for young Kiwi amateur Patrick Mailata. So as stuff has almost insinuated, he was out of his depth and shouldn't have been there. But that rhetoric, it completely ignores some of the initial reporting when Mailata joined the training camp. As Television New Zealand, known as TVNZ, as it said in a story broadcast on March 1st, because I've gone back and I've watched it. Stuff may have just sort of joined some dots here, but I actually went back and checked out why he was actually there. Mailata, he was already in the UK. He was at the same training facility as Joshua in Sheffield. He was preparing for the Commonwealth Games. He was there, he was training in close proximity to Joshua, so he was invited in to give Joshua some work. To me, from the coverage that was initially broadcast, it was right place, right time. And Mailata, he's since stated that he's been better for the experience. He walked away with a wealth of experience and something he'll never forget, and he'll be able to take some of that into his career going forward, amateur or pro. And let's not forget, Patrick Mailata does actually know Joseph Parker. He shared a ring with Joseph Parker previously, and undoubtedly he would have been able to offer some insight on Joseph Parker. So given that, and he was already there, why is this such an outrageous sort of thing that Mailata was there? He was there because he was already there. I just think stuff was a little bit unfair towards Mailata in that regard. In terms of Joshua showing some confusion and the gloves are off, I mean, really that's over to you whether you agree with that. For me, it's probably jazzing things up a little bit much. I mean, if I'm honest, it was a relatively sedate affair, and Joshua and Parker, they were pretty much what we would have expected, humble and a tad boring. And it always figured to play out that way after Parker took the heat out of the build-up by dialing back the trash talk at the initial press conference. So he said, you know, look, that's in the past, we got the fight made, we're moving on, no more trash. So the gloves are off, it was always shaping to be a little bit dull, and it was. The only thing I really agree with from the stuff piece is that Parker and his team, they did manage to score some points over the months and evoke a response from Anthony Joshua on the Glassjaw comments. The constant prodding pre-Christmas and in early January, it did appear to strike a bit of a nerve, and Joshua, he publicly explained away the times that he has been hurt or dropped, which, you know, he didn't really need to do in my view. But in general, I thought the way that some of the information that stuff.co.nz presented was a bit mischievous. There was no balance. It wasn't exactly based in fact, but it was mostly presented in that light. And alarmingly, what has subsequently happened, and this was in the hour or two afterwards, another major news outlet, which I've already mentioned, Television New Zealand, so TVNZ, it picked up the opinion piece, rehashed it into an actual story, so not an opinion piece, and put it on its website. And it had that same sort of panic line. It's kind of a bit like Chinese whispers. And, you know, things change, so now it's kind of legitimized. So what was an opinion piece is now passed off as story, and it's, you know, somehow, if we keep repeating it, it's going to take on more credibility. But it doesn't work that way. Sure, us New Zealanders want Joseph Parker to do well, but I don't understand what the point of essentially discrediting Anthony Joshua is with next to no information. It's more like disinformation. It could actually potentially serve to make New Zealand media look a bit petty and like it wants to latch on to anything that could be slanted negatively against Joshua. For what purpose though? Does it actually help Joseph Parker? Or is it more just designed to fill column inches, some space on websites and whatnot for an interested public? Don't get me wrong, there is a place for those sorts of opinion pieces and stories that have been run on this sort of thing, but they've got to have hard origins and fact, stuff you can actually point back to, and you know it's true, that it's not in dispute, rather than what I believe we've seen is the media interviewing its own keyboards. Just one man's view. What do you make of it all? Drop a comment loud and often. Hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.